landscape and the connection that people have to the place where they live. And unless people feel connected to the place where they live, then it's really hard to gain that type of community momentum that ACCA is working so hard to maintain, and you all bring to the table by your attendance tonight. So thank you all for coming out tonight to hear this. I'd like to acknowledge, I know we just did some acknowledgements, but a few particular acknowledgements here. In general, thank you to ACCA for your support for this project. Dave Blagas, are you here in the audience? Thank you for you. We interviewed a series of local residents to establish an oral history that I'll talk about later. Thank you, Dave. Is Jack Collins here tonight? Jack Collins, we also interviewed him. Bruce Hubler's not here, but his wife is here. And he gave us a lot of time on this project. Wayne Lindquist, is Wayne here? Okay, we talked to Wayne Lindquist too, and Phyllis, I know Phyllis is here. Phyllis Gustafson Marsilius, excuse me, and it was great to speak with you, and Tom Stanky in the back. I noticed you came in earlier. Thank you, Tom. Also, Steve, thanks a lot, and I'm very sad to say that that my project manager for this project has strep throat, so she couldn't attend, and it's really too bad because she worked very hard on this, but she's here in spirit. I think you know you have something special here, right? I think you know that you live in a beautiful place, that Black Rock is a tremendous community, and that you're really gifted with amazing views that, a view like this could easily end up in any, great watercolorist's repertoire, right? The Long Island Sound is an amazing visual resource, and you have such a great connection to the natural environment here that really helps everything from level of happiness in a community all the way to real estate value, frankly. Now, here's a quick quiz here. That landscape that we all live in also has a historic legacy. Does anybody know where this is or what this is here?
The tidal dam.
Yeah, you can see this at low tide at the Great Marsh, and this is an old tidal dam that was built for a mill on the other side. So that's still here today. How about this? Does this look familiar to anyone?
Bridge.
Yeah, it's the old bridge, right? Now it's habitat for oysters. So right before our eyes, we think of these things as these naturalistic landscapes, and they truly are. But at the same time, it's something that we've had a hand in as people living here, not just from the colonial era, but all the way back to Native American times. And there really is a long cultural legacy that's embedded in the landscape. So what is an ecohistoric analysis? Good question. Historic information is critical to understanding the world we live in today. It's a tool to raise awareness in communities about natural environment. It's a general understanding of one's environment changes the way we feel about that environment. So an ecohistorical analysis uses that historic information, merges it with a kind of an ecological history of a place or a natural history of place, and tells a new story and interprets how humans and the non-human components of the community have interacted over time. And that's basically the presentation I have for you today. It's about 45 minutes to an hour. I'm going to try to keep on time with that. And there'll be time for questions afterwards. Now, when we look at this, this great space we obviously have a stewardship responsibility to it. And I have a few inspirational quotes here that I use all the time in talks and presentations because they mean a lot to me. But the first one is a guy named Aldo Leopold, who's a famous conservationist. And he said to really manage landscapes effectively, we have to think like mountains. We have to think like we are the landscape. We have to think beyond our current political timescales and ambitions and the realities of our economic system, and think grander scales and hundreds of year timescales. Chief Seattle, Native American, said something similar, that we should think 7 generations ahead. We shouldn't just plan for our children or our children's children, but I guess that would be their great-grandchildren. And this guy, Wes Jackson, who's a famous sustainable agriculture guru, said if your life's work can be accomplished in your lifetime, then you're not thinking big enough. So keep that in mind. This is more or less Ash Creek and more or less our study area. Here's Black Rock in this section. and the exact boundary is under some discussion, but this is generally black rock. The further south you go, the more likely you are in black rock. Ash Creek is not just this area here as we know it, but it also extends north of Fairfield Avenue up to Brewster Street and beyond. The Rooster River turns into Ash Creek up here. Also part of Ash Creek is Turney Creek in Fairfield, which follows this line here. You'll see in some of the old pictures, used to come all the way up back to this area, and Grasmere fed into it. And another creek here called Riverside Creek. So that's basically the landscape I'll be speaking about today. So here's a kind of an intellectual slide for you. How do you think about, now when we want to think like a mountaineer, we want to think a long time in the past, we got to go way back. And for this presentation, I'm going to go back 30,000 years, okay? So how do I talk about 30,000 years of history in an hour? So this is the technique we came up with. It's called a logarithmic scale, okay? Has anybody ever heard this term? Any calculus students in the room? It's not that complicated, but you got a linear scale, which is like, okay, a linear scale has a steady curve where we talk about you go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 and on out to infinity. For a logarithmic scale, you can divide time up into segments. So you can start at 0 and go to 0.0001, and then eventually you get to 1, and you jump to 10, then you jump to 100, then you jump to 1,000, then you jump to 10,000. So the point of this is that we favored the present in our study, but we went back really far. We went back, you go back about 20, 30,000 years ago, and then the next interval we looked at 8 to 8,000 BCE, to 3,000, to 540, to 740, to 1,300, and on out to the present, until in the present we looked at a 10-year chunk of time. So if you will, I know it's a bit of a complicated principle, but we basically favored the present, and we looked at larger chunks of time as we went further back in history. So how did we craft this presentation? And this is more than just the presentation we crafted, but also kind of the deliverable that we have for this project. First, we created a timeline that went back 30,000 years, okay? And it's a working timeline, a living timeline. It's about 15 or 16 pages of 10-point font text. And it's a living document to hand over to ACCA and update as time goes on and new discoveries are found. We also have an annotated bibliography of all the images you see in here and all the images that we didn't make it into the presentation. That's also a living document for folks. We also went back and we did some oral history work where we interviewed the folks that I called out earlier, and actually have MP3 digital recordings of those that are going to be put with this information, this presentation, into a time capsule given to ACCA so that it can be preserved, maybe put in the Bridgeport and Fairfield libraries, and over time we have a really great start to recording the history. Now I should mention there's been some really great work in the past. There's been a couple books on the history of Black Rock that really made this study possible. So here we go. Now we're 30,000 years ago, and right now, this is actually out in the ocean. We're under like a mile or two of ice here, right? The pressure of the ice is pressing down on the earth. It's shaping the glacial landform, and it is the primary driver of our landscape today. Most of the shapes we see today are formed by the glaciers. How did that happen? Now, if you look closely, here's a glacier, and then here's the tail end of a glacier with the streams coming off of it, and then you can see it pushing and scouring rock up. And then here, this green line is the shape of Connecticut. So that's basically 30,000 years ago. Here you can see the result of that is that the glacier actually crushed rock and smoothed rock and pushed it down to create a coastal wedge, which became Long Island. And then Long Island Sound formed behind that, and then we're here happily on this coastal slope. Now I have a video I want to show you which expresses this. It's from the Maritime Aquarium at Norwalk. And you've got to pay close attention. So I'm going to hit play, and I hope it works. Okay, here, it's loading. And this is going to show 30,000 years of Long Island Sound's formation. So here we are today, right? And we're sitting right around here. Zoom in to Long Island Sound. And here we go, the show begins. Present day, right? This is not water here. This is all coastal forest and meadow. 30,000 years ago. Rivers come down from the glaciers up north and cut canyons and rivers out through that area. This is all coastal plain. People may have lived out here in the past. Old prehistoric communities. You ever hear of Atlantis?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're 20,000 years ago, and the glaciers are advancing. And you can see at the tail end of them, they're pushing up this moraine, this terminal moraine it's called, which is all soil and material. And as they move back, they're creating a freshwater lake here. This isn't saltwater yet. You see the Hudson River Canyon coming down over here? And then there's a tail out this way. So now we're at 15,000 years ago. We've got this freshwater lake that's slowly draining out into the ocean, which is a couple hundred miles offshore. As the glaciers go back, that water that was in the glacial caps now goes into the ocean. Now 12,000 years ago, the Native Americans are running for the moraine at this point. And about 10,000 years ago, we have the terrain that we know today. So the Maritime Aquarium should be really thanked for this. This is a fabulous graphic. So that now, okay. So now we're at like now we're at 10,000 years ago or so, and what do we have? Woolly mammoths, right? Among other things, we had a huge megafauna population in the area that had impacts on the landscape in many ways, but two big ways is that the large animals and the herbivores grazed a lot. This is a modern day photo, and this is an elephant here, and this was a forest.
Yeah.
You had massive herds of large herbivore type species like woolly mammoths and giant sloths moving through the forest, modifying the landscape. We also had predators, a lot more predators around then that altered the natural balance of the food chain. These animals went extinct around 10 to 15,000 years ago from Native American hunting. It's called the Clovis Extinction. So this period of time that Clovis people basically extirpated all these large animals, and very few remain today. That was a major change in the landscape. And those forests that we saw in the coastal plain were heavily modified first by these and then recovered as these large species left. Now we're going very quickly now through the past, right? Now we went from 30,000 BC. Now we're already about 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago. As humans colonized this area, as Native Americans became more established here, they actually had a whole system of nations throughout the continent. Oftentimes, this myth has mainly been debunked now, but we think of Native Americans as savages or cave-type people or something. Obviously not true, right? These people had very complex cultures, and we know not enough about it today, because when the colonial people came, there was a lot of sickness that followed, and there was large losses of population through this area, and the cultures kind of crumbled. They're still intact, but they were damaged severely. In this area alone here, there used to be, I believe, about 80,000 Native Americans along the coast in New England in this area, which is a significant amount of people. When most recently, at the point of first contact, the Aquatic Indians were in this area. They were in Black Rock, Fairfield, Bridgeport today. And this is a depiction, an illustration of what maybe their villages may have looked like with these type of housing structures. Here's some of their basketry. Some of you may have seen these images before in historic Black Rock books. Now this is not Ash Creek, but this is Plymouth Rock, and I put this in here because it's an illustration of what Plymouth Rock looked like. Excuse me, it's not Plymouth Rock. It's just north of there, but it's an illustration of what that area looked like at the time that the Pilgrims landed. And what you see here is this is not a thickly forested area with no human life, right? You see these are all little villages with fences around them. You see there's some groves of trees, but there's also thinned forest. Native Americans practiced a lot of landscape modification. So we weren't landing as from Europe on a blank slate. We were landing on a place that had already been significantly modified. So what did Black Rock look like at the time that Thomas Wheeler came here in the 17th century? This is an example of his house. I don't know if this house was standing in 1650, but it was. I think it may have been erected after that as a later residence. But that was right here, And you see right today, aren't we right about, we're right about right here, right? So I'll orient you. This is where we are now.
Yeah.
And then here's Grover's Hill, which at some points in history was called Grover Hill, and now I believe we call it Grover's Hill. This is the Great Marsh, was so notable then. The Great Marsh and Ash Creek was so noticeable they put it on the map. And Ash Creek ran all the way up this way, and here's a bridge that Mr. Wheeler and his friends built. There were some Indian, Native American habitats in this area. And you can see generally what the depiction of this area looked like. Now we'll zoom forward a bit from there to 1812, and you can start to see more of a landscape impact from settlement. And you can see, here we are again, there's the Great Marsh, here's Black Rock itself, and you can see the starts of roads coming out onto the landform. And there's some question about where the original fort was in Black Rock. This map shows it is right here, which is very close to the water, not on top of the hill. Now that's this map in 1812. Here's I flipped it 90 degrees so you can get a better look at this, okay? So now we're looking, here's the Great Marsh, and here's where we are today. Okay, so you can see there's where they're saying the fort is. There's Grover's Hill. And there's the Great Marsh. Here's the bridge that we saw those oyster shells covered. And an interesting thing is look at the shape of St. Mary's by the Sea then. It's a little different than today. You'll see when I compare it to other photos later. And there was a lot of settlement right up in the area we are now. It may have been because there's a better harbor here than on this side. The railroad came in shortly thereafter and had a lot of impact on the landscape. This is from the 1950s, this depiction of an improvement of it. But basically when they built the railroad train, they did a lot of filling to level the tracks. And you can see it here in this 1865 photo. You see this hard black line right here? That's the railroad line. And what that essentially did is it bisected the estuary into two pieces. A lot of the free-flowing drainage that had happened from the upper area and had moved south now gets dislocated and channelized and moves under the railroad in certain locations. Sure.
You know, back to that fort. I mean, there was an article a couple of months ago about at extreme low tide, you see a foundation actually over on the waterfront in a different location. I mean, there was an article, I don't know if anyone else read that article, but when you go walk around there at real extreme low tide, there is what looks like a foundation in a curved or arched area, and what Kaolian took a picture of it, and then somebody from Fairfield wrote about it. I don't know if that's Bill Lee.
He's convinced that's
said that, and it looks like it makes sense. Not over there, but
not here, but
if you look where that, right over there.
In here.
There's a
well, there is
like a
this
foundation.
Near
there's
Middle
a
Wharf.
or something that came out here, right?
Near
You see
Middle
there's
Wharf, at the end of Beacon,
no.
No.
right around St. Mary's.
We're the north, south, east, west.
Yeah, right.
I mean, and it looks there's something there. Right?
There's debate about it.
Well, that's a good example of something that should be added into the ecohistoric timeline. It's a living
Figure it out.
document, and we should figure that out because you'll see in some of these later slides that there used to be a big sandy beach along this section in particular, and that's totally gone now in the last 150 years. So it's very possible that this space was more hospitable to a building at some point 200 years ago. I don't know, I'm just speculating. So you see the railroad here that bisects this ecosystem into, or this habitat community into two sections. And you can see the start of real town development. You can see here's kind of a downtown Fairfield here. You can see a lot of the agricultural land being parceled up. This is what agricultural land looks like. Same thing here on Black Rock. A lot of like meadow-looking parcels, not a lot of residential-looking parcels here in 1865. There's a few dark buildings that are here, and some of them remain to today. And you can see also the shape of this sand spit is very gentle here. Incidentally, all this area here behind where Jennings Beach is now, that was all wetland. That was all old wetland here. And you can see these gray areas are wetland. Look at all the wetland that was there back then. You'll see in later slides to compare.
It's wetlands. It's wetlands now too.
Yeah, some of this is
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Look where Sandy went in there.
Now here we're in 1888, okay, and you know this is I threw this slide in here because this is interesting because now it starts to show the land parcels of Black Rock being split up. You can see the George Hotel right here, which is an important feature, and you can see the start of these kind of auxiliary buildings along it, and up in this back area. So this is a whole complex, and then other houses here. Not much along the beach at this point. No sign in this slide at all of the fort. Okay, and now we're in 1888. We can see back here there's this little tidal connection to a pond, which you'll notice in later photos. This is now filled in here, but the pond remains.
And what happened to Great Marsh Island?
And they didn't even care enough about Great Marsh Island. This is a tax map, I think, or something,
okay.
something like that. Where
Yeah.
if you can't tax, if there's nobody living there, then there's no point in putting them on the map, I guess. But this is interesting that they left that out. And look at this very natural shape of the inlet here. Some people had claimed the marshes up here. This was marsh area at that time. And I was talking with Michael Aurelia right before the presentation that the high marsh areas were prized for cattle grazing in this area. There's a species, I think it's the Disticulus, right, that they like to eat quite a bit.
Paytons.
And Paytons, the Paytons also. Paytons and Disticulus are good cattle fodder. Now here, does anybody know what this building is here? Right. Look at it there. Can you see?
It's a bridge.
Can you see? It's a stone building. Yeah. And it's like a stone facade at least. And then look in the back here.
Yeah, so they did
Now
mentions.
these are either, I think this is the George Hotel.
Yeah, must be.
Okay. I think. And now at some point mansions were built up along this area as well. I think we're before that, okay? But where is, can anybody guess where this picture is taken from? What's like the perspective? Fairfield. We're in Fairfield. Jennings Beach, right?
Yeah.
Looking across. So what's this like gentle looking gradual?
That's the
That's the
outflow.
inlet.
That's the end. There's no jetty here.
Yeah.
Look at the low tide beach here. Okay. Now this row of trees here, this is probably Gilman Street, right? Okay. And look at the size of the beach that was there at that point. It's a big beach. Looks a little different than today. So here in 1895, you can see very clearly two features that I'd like to point out to you. The first is the beginning of this circulation road that now goes around the whole bottom half of Grover's Hill. If you go back here, that road is not in yet. It's starting to be a bit, but it's not like a defined circle. It's going all the way out to the tip of the sand spit and then coming back around. Whereas here, it's a very neat circle, right? Which tells me that there's development going on along this, and this is being defined as a real pathway. The other thing to note here is the blue lines are wetland, right? So you can see the extent of wetland in the estuary. Up in this section here, even over where we are now, there was a lot of marsh. Back up here, you can see the railroad. And then up in this section, the creek used to be much wider up where the old Bullard's factory was, where the movie theater is now. You can see this expansive wetland. That is about I believe about a 300 or 400 foot wide wetland that is not there anymore. Now that area is maybe 50, 75 feet wide, but this is the size of a football field or a soccer pitch in width. Another thing you start to see around this time period in the late 1800s, early 1900s, is the emergence of this really recreational beach culture. These scenes are pretty interesting here. If you look, here's a fellow with a cap and a looks like a fishing net or something to catch fish with, a minnow net. A nice parasol umbrella this man might be holding. Maybe it belonged to this woman who is down here. I think she's cooking. They're having they're frying fish on the beach, right? So this was something that you start to see around then when people would, maybe they were at the George Hotel or maybe they were in one of these newly constructed beachfront homes. Some of these beachfront homes that were built along where St. Mary's Promenade is, today, and where some homes are still remaining, was similar to the scene in Newport. You know, like the walk in Newport.
Cottages.
Yeah, cottages. So folks would come out for their cottages, and there was a whole culture that went with those cottages too, because to run a cottage, some of the cottage can have 10 or 15 fireplaces, right? So you need like a full-time person to keep your fires lit. You need like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cooks. You need cleaning people. Where do those people live? They all lived around the area. So you had this rich culture, and I mean rich in the non-financial sense. I mean rich in that you had all these different service-type people, wealthy people who are coming in from the city, artists, all congregating and communing in this beautiful location. And it's interesting that these people look to be wearing, you know, some of their finest clothes, but they're still on the beach, which, you know, is I think pretty neat. Maybe now as, you know, Patagonia gets more popular and people spend $100 on blue jeans, that maybe that's the same thing as what people used to do then. I don't know, but that might be a stretch. In this scene here, you can see the same type of thing. It's a family. Look at this classic bathing suit that the men would wear. It looks like he's a Greco-Roman wrestler today. And then down here, you know, these
You're going to be there for a while.
I know. Pay attention to the tide.
Yes, these people are in here, and can you see what's in this? It might be the same woman here in this picture. Can you see what's in her hand here?
She has a fork. She's must.
Yeah, it's a fork. She's clamming or picking up oysters or something. Here, I guess oysters are better with forks. Yeah, and there's St. Mary's in the background there. So this was like, you know, I mean, I'm romanticizing it a bit, right? But this was, you know, this was culture in Black Rock 100 years ago. Now we start to move on a bit, and you start to get a lot more landform alteration in the area, I'll say. You have, does anybody know what this is here?
That's the that's where the lighthouse is.
Yeah, look how manicured this is, how perfect that curve is. Look at this shape here. You know, you got the lighthouse out there, right?
It's all landfill.
It's all, yeah. Before the land. And this really is like, this is like humans saying we have diesel engines and tractors and machines, and we can modify our landscape to make it however we want. And that's really an interesting development that starts to happen about 100 years ago, where the power of the diesel engine really gets up close and personal.
So that's beginnings of the seaside beach.
Yeah. Now here we are in 1934. Connecticut DEP and Yukon, I think, have the great historic aerial photos you can use. And this is in 1934. This is a really good picture that I want to spend a minute on. Here's the Great Marsh Island. Here's our sand spit, our barrier spit. Okay. This is Kaposi Park. And then I believe the George Hotel would have been here, but I think it's gone at this point.
It's chopped off.
And then you can see these cottages here along the edge of the beach. Here. But as a whole, Grover's Hill is not so heavily developed yet. There's a lot of blank space here. There used to be some orchards. There's some main buildings up here, a few main compound type buildings that you can see the road go right to. And you can also see here some housing development starting to creep in. On the Fairfield side, the marina is not yet in. This is all salt marsh. Here's that Turney Creek that I mentioned earlier. Much wider. This is before the tidal gate was put in and then filled in. Here's Riverside Creek here, which came back here and kind of connected maybe to this other creek, which led out over here. And this is where that guardhouse is today. If you go over to that side, it always floods. No wonder it floods. It's in the wetlands, right? And you can see a pretty nice intact system. There are a few things in the marsh that we don't see today, particularly these little Spartina islands up here aren't around anymore. You can see some industrial work happening in this area.
No I-95.
No I-95 yet. Here's the railroad right here. Okay, so these pictures are literally worth a million words.
And there's a large island, long, thin island up there in the upper part.
Right here, yeah, right. So the Metro Center today that was just, is still in construction, is in this area. The movie theater would have been here. The new Whole Foods is back over here. And this whole Spartina Marsh was, at this point, intact. I don't know how healthy it was, because there was a lot of industrial activity going on up here, but it was intact in that area. Here in 37 is a little easier map to read. You can see again a similar type of landscape. It hasn't changed much. These wetlands are still intact. There's still a meandering stream up here north of next to the movie theaters, and generally these wetlands are still here. Now, this is not black.